Good afternoon. I'm Berlina Siombing from Group 6. I would like to share about the background of our study. Listening is an essential role in developing language proficiency. Studies look at the effect of a number of different contextual characteristics and how they affect the speed and the efficiency of processing oral language. Research also shows that when we communicate, we spend around 40 till 50% of our time listening. So it is really important. Therefore, Rubin identified 5 such factors that needed in listening. The first one is text, interlocutors, task, listeners, and the characteristics process. For example, we have to identify the characteristics of listeners that we are talking to, like age, gender, background, and so on. Listening is probably the most difficult skill to learn. That's why designing listening materials is really needed to help students connect to the material they are learning and to life context. Good afternoon. I'm Berlina Siombing from Group 6. I would like to share about the background of our study. Listening is This leads us to the formulation of the problem. The first one, what is the principle for teaching listening skills? Next, how to design micro scale and macro scale of listening? Next, what are the techniques of teaching listening skills? And what does make listening difficult? And the last one is how to assess listening in the classroom. And the purpose of our study are to know the principle for teaching listening skill, to know how to design our micro and macro of listening, to know what techniques for teaching listening skill, to know what makes listening difficult, and the last one is to know how to assess listening in the classroom. Alright, I'm going to start the first one. It is principles of teaching listening skills. This is really important when teaching listening because it will help you to create your own techniques and activities. How? The first one, include a focus on listening in an integrated skill course. Assuming that your curriculum is dedicated to the integration of all 4 skills, remember that each of the separate skills deserves special focus in appropriate doses. The second one, use techniques that are intrinsically motivating. Appeal to listeners' personal interests and goals. Since background information is an important factor in listening, take into full account the experiences, goals, and abilities of your students as you design lessons. The third one, utilize authentic language and context. Authentic language and real-world tasks enable students to see the relevance of classroom activity to their long-term communicative goals. Next, carefully consider the form of listeners' responses. Comprehension itself is not externally observable. We cannot peer into a learner's brain through a little window and empirically observe what is told thereafter if someone else has said something. We can only infer that certain ideas have been comprehended through students' or verbal or nonverbal responses to speech. It is therefore important for teachers to design techniques in such a way that students' responses indicate whether or not their comprehension has been correct. The next one is encourage the development of listening strategies. Most foreign language students are simply not aware of how to listen. One of your jobs is to equip them with listening strategies that extend beyond the classroom. Draw their attention. That's all from me. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, sir, and all my friends. My name is Mailan Priskawati Siombing. Now, I will explain about macro and micro listening skill. Macro listening skills are right brain processes. They are holistic and intuitive. Micro listening skills are left brain processes based on logical, analysis, and linear decoding. The former pertain to skills at the sentences level. Such lists are useful in helping you to break down just what it is that your learners need to actually perform as they acquire effective listening strategies. Through a checklist of micro and macro skills, you can get a good idea of what your techniques need to cover in the domain of listening comprehensions. As you plan a specific techniques or listening module, such a list helps you to focus on clearly conceptualized objectives. And in your evaluation of listening, these micro and macro skills can become testing criteria. There are 17 skills of micro and macro skills of listening comprehension. About micro skills. 1. Retain chunks of language of different lengths in short-term memory. 2. Discriminate among the distinctive sounds of English. 3. Recognize English stress patterns, words in stresses and unstressed position, rhythmic structure, intonation contours, and their role in signaling information. 4. Recognize reduce form of words. 5. Distinguish word boundaries, recognize a core of words, and interpret word order patterns and their significance. 6. Process speech at different rate of delivery. 7. Process speech containing pause, errors, corrections, and other perform variables. 8. Recognize grammatical word classes, nouns, verbs, etc. About systems, tense, agreements, pluralization, patterns, rule, and elliptical forms. 9. Detect sentence constituent and distinguish between major and minor constituent. 10. Recognize that a particular meaning may be expressed in different grammatical form. About micro skills. 11. Recognize cohesive device in spoken discourse. 12. Recognize the communicative function of utterances according to situation, participant, goals. 13. Infer situation, participant, goals using real-world knowledge. 14. From events, ideas, etc. Describe, predict outcomes, either links and connection between events, deduce causes and effects, and detect such relation as many idea, supporting idea, new information, given information, generalization, and exemplification. 15. Distinguish between literary and implied meaning. 16. Use facial, kinesthetic, body language, and other nonverbal clues to decipher meanings. And the last, develop and use a battery of listening strategies such as detecting keywords, guessing the meaning of words from context, applying for help, and signaling comprehension or lack thereof. Techniques for teaching listening. Techniques for teaching listening will vary considerably across the proficiency continuum. Listening techniques are no exception to the general rule. The importance of listening comprehension in language learning should by now be quite apparent. As we move on to look at speaking skills, always remember the ever-present relationship among all four skills and the necessity in authentic, interactive classes to integrate these skills even as you focus on the specific of one skill area. Techniques for teaching listening have 3 levels. The first level for beginning level listener. For beginning level listener have 3 exercises. The first exercise is bottom-up exercise. 1. Discriminate between intonation contours in sentences. 2. Discriminate between phonemes. 3. Selective listening for morphological endings. 4. Select details from the text or word recognition. 5. Listen to normal sentence word order. 2 exercise, top-down exercise. 1. Discriminate between emotional reaction. 2. Get the gist of a sentence. 3. Recognize the topic. And the third exercise is interactive. 1. Build a semantic network of words association. 2. Recognize a familiar word and relate it to category. 3. Follow direction. Second level. 4. Intermediate level have 3 exercise. First, bottom-up exercise. 1. Recognize fast speech forms. 2. Find the stressed syllable. 3. Recognize words with reduced syllables. 4. Recognize words as they are linked in the speech stream. 5. Recognize pertinent details in the speech stream. 7. Analyze discourse structure to suggest effective listening strategies. 8. Listen to identify the speakers or the topic. 9. Listen to evaluate themes and movies. 10. Find main ideas and supporting details. And the last, make inferences. And the third exercise about interactive. First, discriminate between register of speech and tones of voice. 2. Recognize missing grammar markers in colloquial speech. 3. Use knowledge of reduced form to clarify the meaning of an utterances. 4. Use context to build listening expectation. 5. Listen to confirm your expectation. 6. Use contents to build expectation. Use bottom-up processing to recognize missing words. Compare your prediction to what you actually heard. 7. Use incomplete sensory data and culture background information to construct a more complete understanding of a text. And the last level about for advanced. 3 exercise. First, bottom-up exercise. 1. Use feature of sentence stress and volume to identify important information for note-taking. 2. Become aware of sentence level feature in lecture text. 3. Become aware of organizational quiz in lecture text. 4. Become aware of lexical and suprasegmental marker for definition. 5. Identify specific point of information. The second exercise about top-down. First, use the instruction to the lecture to predict its focus and direction. 2. Use the lecture transcript to predict the content of the next section. 3. Find the main idea of a lecture segment. 4. Use incoming details to determine the accuracy of prediction about contents. 5. Determine the main idea of the section of the lecture by analysis of the details in that section. And the last, make inferences by identifying ideas on the sentence level that lead to evaluate statement.
Material is about what makes listening difficult. Actually, there are 4 basic English language skills, which is listening, reading, writing, and speaking. The most difficult to acquire is listening comprehension. It is also the one skill which cannot be taught. Second language learners need to pay special attention to such factors because they strongly influence the processing of speech and can even block comprehension if they are not attended to. In other words, they can make the listening process difficult. According to Richards on the book of The Principle of Teaching by Browns, there are 8 characteristics of spoken language. The first is clustering. In written language, sentence is the basic unit of organizations. In spoken language, due to memory limitation and our predisposition for chunking or listening, we break down speech into smaller groups of words. In teaching listening comprehension, therefore, we need to have students to pick out manageable clusters of words. Second is redundancy. Spoken language, unlike most written language, has a good ideal of redundancy. The next time you are in a conversation, notice the paraphrasing, repetitions, elaboration, and little insertion of "I mean," and "you know." Such redundancy help to hurry the process by offering more time and extra information. The next is reduced form. Reduced form can be phonological "did yet" for "did you eat yet?", morphological construction like "I'll", synthetic elliptical forms like "when will you be back?", "tomorrow maybe", or pragmatics "the phone rings in a house", child answers and yells to another room in the house, "Mom, phone". This reduction poses significant difficulties, especially for classroom learners who might have initially been exposed to the vowel forms of the English language. Then, performance variables. Casual speech by a native speaker also commonly contains ungrammatical forms. Some of these forms are simple performance slip. For example, we arrive in a little town that there is no hotel anywhere. Is something a native speaker could easily self-correct. Other ungrammaticality arises of dialect differences. I don't get no respect. That second language learners likely to hear sooner or later. For the next is colloquial language. Learners who have been exposed to standard written language and textbook language sometimes to find surprising and difficult to deal with colloquial language, idioms, slang, reduced form, and circular knowledge or all manifested at some point in conversation. Colloquialism appears in both monologues and dialogues. Constructions and other assimilation often pose difficulty for the learner of English. Rate of delivery. Virtually every language learner initially thinks that native speakers speak too fast. Actually, as Jack Richards 1983 points out, the number and length of pauses used by a speaker are more crucial to comprehension than sheer speed. Unlike reading, where a person can stop, go back to reread, in listening, the reread may not always have the opportunity to stop the speaker. The next is stress, rhythm, and intonation. English is a stress-time language. English speech can be a terror from some learners as mouthfuls of syllables come spilling out between stress points. Also, intonation patterns are very significant not just for interpreting straightforward elements such as question, statement, and emphasize, but for understanding more subtle message like sarcasm, endearment, insult, salutation, and praise. For the last is interaction. Interaction will play a large role in listening comprehension. Conversation is especially subject to all rules of interaction, negotiation, clarification, attending signal, turn-taking, and topic nomination, maintenance, and termination. So, to learn to listen is also to learn to respond and to continue a chain of listening and responding. Classroom techniques that include listening component must at some point include instruction in one-way nature of listening. Students need to understand that good listener in conversation are good respondent. Next slide is assessing listening in the classroom. Every classroom lesson involves some form of assessment, whether it is in the form of informal, unplanned, and intuitive teacher processing and feedback, or informal prepared score tests. Understanding the terms assessment and test. Tests are a subset of assessment. Assessment is an ongoing pedagogical process that includes a number of evaluative acts on the part of the teacher. When a student responds to a question, offers a comment, or tries out a new word or structure, the teacher subconsciously makes an evaluation for the student performance. A student's written work from notes and short answer to essay is judged by the teacher. In reading and listening activity, student responses are implicitly evaluated. All that is assessment. Technically, it is referred to as informal assessment because it is usually unplanned and spontaneous without specific scoring and grading formats as opposed to formal assessment. Tests fall into the latter category. They are planned and set of tasks or exercises with decided time frames, often announced in advance, prepared for, and sometimes feared by the student, and characteristically offering specific scoring or grading formats. Listening is unsurfable. You cannot directly see or measure or otherwise observe either the process of the product or of overall comprehension. Oh, yes, I can hear you saying that if you ask someone to close the window and they close it, you have observed oral comprehension. Or that if someone nods and say, oh, while you are talking, you have evidence of comprehension. And then for the next is assessing types of listening, micro and macro skills. According to Brown 24, there are several assessment methods, include tags, item formats are commonly used at the various levels. Number one is intensive listening tags, distinguishing phonemic pairs like grass, glass, leaf, leaf. Distinguishing morphological pairs, miss, missed. Distinguishing stress pattern, I can go and I can't go. Paraphrase recognition, I come from Taiwan and I'm Taiwanese. Repetition, shouldn't repeat a word. Number two is responsive listening tasks. Questions, whether multiple choice and respond, and questions about open-ended response. Simple discourse sequence, hello, nice weather, thought tasks. And number three is selective listening tasks. Listening close, like fill in the blank. Verbal information transfer, like give verbal response. And picture cue information transfer, like choose a picture. Chart completion, like fill in a grid. Sentence repetition, like repeat stimulus sentence. Number four is extensive listening tasks. Dictation, listen usually 3 times and write a paragraph. Dialogue, hear a dialogue and comprehension questions. Dialogue, student hear dialogue and open-ended questions. Lecture, student have take notes, summarize, list main points. And interpretive talks, student have to hear a poem and interpret meaning. And then the last is stories, narrative, student have to retell a story. I think enough for me. Thank you.
The last is the conclusion from our presentation. The result of this study showed that the interactive model of listening can be used to support the learning activity. The advent of techniques requires material developers to develop and design the teaching materials and surely help you to design a yielded listening class. Some suggestions are also presented in this paper which might be taken into consideration for those who will conduct a similar study as well as for the instructor who will use the product. We can use a lot of techniques to teach listening, which is divided into some levels like beginning level listeners, intermediate level listeners, and advanced level learners. I think that's all from our group. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your participation and see you in the next meeting.